Hey everybody, welcome back to The Engineered Angler. My name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer, and lure maker, and I make these videos to share some of the tricks and techniques I've learned over the course of a lot of years making lures, and to add a little bit of physics and engineering to the art of lure making. So today I'm going to make a lure that was suggested by one of you guys. Now, truth be told, I've been planning to make a weight shift long casting lure for quite a while. Just haven't gotten to it, but I think this is a good time. So I'm not going to design a brand new lure. I'm actually going to turn this lure that I've already got a mold for into a weight shift lure. It already has a knocker in it. And the fact that it's nice and broad all the way to the tail allows me to put in a long weight shift chamber with some balls in it. And be sure to stick around till the end because I'm going to announce the winner of the 30K giveaway. I'll let you know who won this lure. One little hint, the person who did it guessed exactly right. Who would have thought? All right, this is the general shape of that lure. It has a little bit of a flat spot right about here just to help it keep its head above water when you're using it as a topwater. And the tie-on eye is below the center line of the lure. But we're gonna make a little bit of a change. We're gonna reconfigure this lure. Most of the time when lure makers design a weight shift, they usually use some geometry that allows the balls to move to the back when you fling it and then drop back down to the front and stay there while you retrieve the lure. So usually there'll be some sort of shifting chamber that will hold the balls down here when the lure is just stationary, and then when you fling it, it flings it up and into the tail. And then when the lure lands, they all roll back down to the front, rebalancing the lure. We're gonna do it a little different. First, because creating that kind of chamber in a molded lure means you actually have to cast your lure in two parts so that you can put it together afterwards. That means two molds. It's a lot easier just to take my normal rattle chamber and extend it out to the very tail as far as it'll go. We'll put our ball weights in there, and then to keep those ball weights to the front when we want it there, we're gonna add a small magnet right there. This way, the inertia of the cast will push all these balls to the back. It will fly tail first and give you a lot longer cast. When the lure lands and you give it the first twitch, the inertia of the balls moving forward and the lure slowing down will cause the balls to roll forward into the influence of that magnet and hold them there for the rest of the retrieve. But I want to reconfigure this lure so it'll sink and act as a twitch bait. So that means two things: having enough weight in it to sink it, and moving this tie-on eye to the center line of the lure. This way you're not pulling up on the lure when you're twitching it, it's just pulling straight. And we'll keep both the tail and the belly hook eye in the same place. So I've already got a silicone mold for this. What I do need is a wire harness that'll be inside the lure and allow for a long weight shift chamber to be glued to it, so it'll all be sitting inside that mold when I cast it. And as usual, I'm going to be using this stainless steel leader wire. This is a number 12 wire. That means it's 0.71 millimeters in diameter, or 0.028 inches in diameter. And I'm gonna need about 8 inches of it. I make my rattle chambers from a straw. And of course the key is to have a straw with the right inside diameter. These will fit a 1/4 inch ball perfectly. I've been getting them from the same place for years, and while I really don't want to promote people just going to restaurants to take straws home with them, the only place I've been able to find this size is at a popular restaurant here in the US, and they're a chain, so there's a lot of them all over the world. Let's just say it's a restaurant where you mostly get coffee and donuts, and you're expected to sort of dunk your food. Do what you think is right, take one or two, don't go crazy. So typically I'll take a small segment and I'll cap the ends and I'll put a ball in there. But in this one, it's not about getting a rattle sound, it's about getting a weight shift. So I need to measure how far I can go along this wire harness and still be covered up by the resin and not exposed at the top. So we're gonna measure right to about there where my finger is. I'm gonna put a little line there, about 7.2 centimeters or 2 7/8 of an inch. So we know it's going to be 7.2 centimeters long. We need to find out how much this displaces so we know how much weight we need to put inside it so that if I put this tube in the water, it will sink. I don't need it to be super heavy, just enough so it doesn't add buoyancy to the lure. Because I'm going to add a weight up front to be sure that once it hits the water, it wants to point nose down and all the balls will roll to the front. So we need to calculate the volume of this thing. So the volume of the cylinder is just the area of the end times the length. And the area of the end is equal to pi times the radius squared. The radius is half the diameter, and the diameter is 0.725 centimeters. And I want to do everything in centimeters because in the end, I want my volume to be in cubic centimeters. Just makes it a lot easier to deal with the buoyancy later. So the radius is half the diameter, so that's 0.363. And we need r squared for the area. And if you don't have the square function on your calculator, you can just multiply this times itself. So you get 0.131. So the volume is equal to pi, which is 3.14, times r squared, which is 0.131, times the length, which is 7.2. So we get 2.96 centimeters cubed. So that means that tube and all the weight and the magnet has to weigh at least 2.96, probably somewhere around 3, for it to just sink in water. So now I'm going to weight the little chamber, and I've already put the cap in one end and I've got the other cap here. If you haven't seen the video where I go through the whole process of making these rattles, I'll put a link up here somewhere. So the tube, the caps, and the 3 balls are 3.68, which will make that tube negatively buoyant. That's what we want. But I also have to weigh the magnet. I got to put the magnet on something up and away from the scale. I'm going to go ahead and just zero it with that little plastic cap on there. And it's 0.76. And that gives us a total weight for the chamber of 4.35 grams. So the next challenge is going to be to figure out how much total weight that lure has to be, including all the hardware, the weight shift chamber, and everything. So at this point you could just take your mold and mold a lure, just a blank, and use that blank to figure out how much weight you would need to add to it to sink. And that's how I would do it, but I have my original wooden carved version of the lure, and I'm just going to take this and measure the volume of it, and then I can immediately know what I need to get it to sink. So we're going to take a cup full of water, making sure there's enough in there to submerge my lure into, and I'm going to go ahead and zero the scale with the water on it, and then we'll lower the lure into the water, not touching any of the sides of the bottom, just deep enough so it's submerged. It's like 29.4 grams. So that measurement is the direct measurement of the buoyant force. So I know that this original lure displaces 29.4 cubic centimeters of water. So that's the volume of the lure. Now I can use the volume that I just figured out to calculate the weight of the lure cast from the resin. All I need is the density of the resin. And I always make little test pucks of the resin I use. Whenever I get a new bottle, I'll pour a little bit in the bottom of a little graduated plastic cup. This way I know the volume, I just weigh it, and then I just divide the volume into the weight, and I have my density. Now, if I was really being picky, I could take the volume of the chamber and subtract the weight of that volume in the actual resin. This way I would get an exact number, and that would be important if I was trying to make a lure that was suspending. At this point, I just want a lure that either floats or sinks, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make two. I'm going to make a lure that sinks and I can use as a twitch bait, and another one that is going to float the way this lure was intended to. And this way I'll have a topwater lure with a weight shift chamber in it too. So the volume of the lure is 29.4 cubic centimeters, and I'm going to use a resin mix that I've already worked out has a density of 0.731. So all I have to do is multiply 0.731 times the volume, and that gives me the weight of the lure made out of resin, which is 21.5 grams. And we know we need to have the lure weighed greater than 29.4 to sink, but I want this lure to sink pretty quick. I'm going to be using it in salt water, so it needs to weigh about 15% more than the minimum. So I'm going to shoot for about 35 grams as my target weight. Since 35 grams is my target and 21.5 is what the lure body will weigh, the difference is 13.5 grams. That's what I have to add to the lure body. That will include all the internal hardware and the hooks. All right, so let's go ahead and weigh the hooks, split rings, the harness, and the weight shift chamber, and we get 7.3 grams. So now I go through my split shot collection and pick out some that I think will add up to the weight we need, which is 13.5. And I've got a small one and a slightly larger one, and we get 13.21, and I think that's close enough. All right, now I'm just going to pinch the weight right onto the wire harness. The smaller one I flattened out so it would fit well. And the chamber is going to go right like that on the wire and get glued on with some crazy glue. I get it nicely aligned and then spritz it with some accelerator. and do the same thing up front. All right, that should do it. We're ready to cast the lure. So while this cures, it's a perfect time for the question of the week. So I get tons of questions about the actual silicone that I use to make molds and how to deal with some of the little minor problems that you have. What are my tips and what have I run into and how have I solved them? And I think there are a lot of little things that can go wrong, but if you've selected the right silicone and you've figured out how much you need for the pour, the next thing is proper mixing. Now, it's important to mix it just like the manufacturer says. Some say mix by weight, some say mix by volume. Either way, you need to find the most accurate way to make that measurement and mix it well. One of the small but really important things to know is that your mixing stick or whatever you're mixing with has to be able to scrape the bottom. If it's rounded and the bottom is completely flat, then you're going to be scraping little tiny lines. It's better to use a flat mixer to scrape the bottom. But if you have a container like this one where the bottom has a radius to it, it's really difficult to get in there unless you have a round mixer. So what I think is best is to find a mixing container that has a nice flat bottom and a hard close to 90-degree angle between the bottom and the sides. And then always remember to scrape the stick off at least 2 or 3 times. You scrape the residue off the stick, push it down into the main volume of the stuff you're mixing, and then continue to mix. The other thing is orient your lure so that you can pour from the top. This way, the lightest material is on top and the heaviest material is on the bottom. That will help you in your weight and balance when you go to add weight to your lure. And on long lures, I like to orient it on an angle so I'm pouring from the top and the very front of the lure. I find that reduces the number of bubbles and ensures there's no undercuts that I'm pouring into. Also, don't be shy with your vents. Put as many vents as you think you're going to need. They're usually really tiny and easy to break off once you pull your casting out. Now, I've had a few people ask me about Platinum Cure silicone and some issues that they're having. I find that Platinum Cure silicone tends to leave a little bit of a blush once it's hardened. In other words, it has a sort of a almost sticky surface. Not really sticky, more slimy than sticky. It seems to blush some solvent, and that's usually okay. What I do is I just wipe it down with some denatured alcohol. It usually pulls it all off and leaves you a nice tack-free surface. But I do think that the Platinum Cure silicone is a little fussier than the Tin Cure. With Platinum Cure, you have to use sulfur-free clay as your clay bed, and that's a little more expensive and a little harder to source. Now, you can do all those things, or you can just go with the Tin Cure, which is less expensive, easier to use, and a little more reliable. And the last thing is, don't use 2 different manufacturers' silicone to make the 2 halves of your lure, like I did with this one. Let me show you. You can see the 2 different colors, and if you look closely, you can see that the shrinkage has already started on this lure, and the light blue is a little smaller than the purple. And what that does to your casting is it offsets your seam, and you'll end up having to do a little more sanding. All right, it feels like it's set. Hopefully we got a good pour. See how it came out. All right, looks good. Looks like I mixed just the right amount. All right, let's pour it out, pull it out of here. No rattle sound. Let's see if I can get it to go down. Yeah. So let me clean it up and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, I got them both out of the mold and I've got them sanded down pretty well. I was very surprised at the condition of this mold. It was a lot worse off than I thought. And the little alignment tabs, they've been just popping off when I was trying to clean it. They just yeah, look at that. It just kind of pops off for some reason. All right, so since I have to wait at least 2 days before I can start to paint these, or else the paint will look like crap, because the resin has to really completely cure. What I do to speed that process up is I put them in my little shop oven for a couple of hours at about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. That usually evaporates all the solvents out of it, and I can just wipe it down and start painting. Still gotta wait at least a day. So what I wanna do is go ahead and go down to the lake, not my lake, but the big lake, and we'll do a little casting trial and see if the weight shift makes any difference on the length of the cast, and we can compare it to the original with just a knocker in it. All right, first let's go ahead and weigh these. This is the one that is supposed to be a sinking one, and our target weight with the hooks and everything was 35 grams, so let's see what it says. 32.23. That's probably mostly because of all the sanding I had to do to get this thing smooth. I'm not too worried. I gave it a big factor of safety. I'm pretty sure it'll sink like a rock. This is the topwater one I made off camera. Let's see what that ended up being. 26.08, and if you'll remember, it needs to be below 30 grams to float. So let's go ahead and put it in a tank and see what they look like. All right, let's see. First, let's see what the topwater one looks like. There you go. Let's see what it looks like when I have the weights to the tail. So if I can get the weights back and keep them back, it'll probably walk the dog really well. All right, here's the one that's supposed to sink. Oh yeah, like a stone. That's what I want for the salt water. I want it to be moving pretty fast down in the deeper water. Let's see how it sinks with all the weights at the tail. Well, that tells me that the weights are going to go to the front every time, and that's the way a weight shift is supposed to work. And it's a really breezy day. The wind's coming out of the east, east-northeast. So I'm tucked away over here, the east-northeast little cove, pinned down in the grass. And I'm hoping first to avoid wind noise for the camera, but also to avoid any kind of interference with the wind for this cast. Now, I brought the original. This is actually not the same one I was showing you in the shop, but it's the exact same one out of the same mold. And I'm gonna use this as kind of my control. I'm gonna cast straight for that last clump of cypress trees. I'm not gonna go crazy trying to get it out there. I'm just gonna give an average cast. That's about 30 yards. All right, I'm gonna give it a couple more casts just to make sure the line is all loose on the spool. And I'll do it till I'm getting consistent casts. All right, so I can see a significant wobble when this thing is flying through the air. So hopefully that weight shift will get all the weight in the back and reduce that wobble to near nothing. All right, let's switch to the top water of the new ones. Oh yeah, that was at least an extra 5 yards. And I kind of lofted it. I think I can get a little more out of it even. The lure is sort of aligning with the cast and giving me a better trajectory. The thing about casting that far is it takes forever to get it back. Give another cast. There we go. Oh, that's well over 10 yards farther than the original one. So it's really amazing how it actually forces this lure to fly tail first, and a lot more aerodynamically. It doesn't go back and forth and just lose a lot of speed. So let's go ahead and use the sinking lure now. Holy moly, that's really way out there. And this thing is sinking pretty fast, so it's gonna twitch it all the way back. Who knows, maybe it'll get hit. Gee, well, you can tell by how long it's flying and how much line I'm actually stripping off this thing, that it's really getting out there. All right, this is the floating one. Let's see. I think I might be able to walk the dog with this thing. You twitch it really hard, and then it'll walk the dog pretty well. It's not the best walk the dog, but it definitely works. All right, here's the sinking one. And you can see it really just turns head down and just shoots for the bottom. But it's twitchable. All right, let's get some underwater shots. See what it looks like twitching it from underwater. All right, it's time to go ahead and announce the winner. The winner of this lure, I assume your name is Garrett because your YouTube handle is not exactly a name. So I'll go ahead and put it down here somewhere. So if this is you, congratulations. You guessed exactly 3 pounds, 2 ounces, and that's exactly what the fish weighed. Email me your shipping information to engineeredangler@gmail.com. It's right here. And I want to say thank you for everyone who offered so many really nice comments on our celebration video. And a thank you to everybody who went ahead and threw a guess in there, even though they had no idea what a largemouth bass would weigh. So congrats to Garrett, and thank you to everybody who's been a part of the growth of the channel. And I'll see you all next Friday.